Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating framework drawn directly from our source text, knowing the truth about this world and the afterlife. We're going to explore the entire chronological journey of the soul, from the actual purpose of our physical existence right up to how our ultimate destination is determined. So, let's jump right in.
We have to start with a highly practical question that the text immediately addresses. It's the ultimate skeptic's question, right? If spirits, deities, and the afterlife actually exist, why are they totally hidden from our everyday waking view? Why isn't the spiritual world just, obvious to everyone? Well, the source text doesn't shy away from this at all. In fact, it argues that this invisibility is absolutely crucial for our development.
The text defines Earth in a very specific way. It calls it a spiritual training ground. The core idea here is that if the spirit world were constantly visible, constantly intervening in our daily lives, it would completely ruin our independent development. Think about it. If you always had the answers to a test floating right in front of you, you wouldn't actually learn a thing, would you? The invisibility is what ensures authentic soul growth.
There's a really striking analogy used here. It compares direct spiritual interference to poking a turtle with a stick. Just as a turtle retreats into its shell to hide when it gets poked, the text argues that if humans were constantly corrected by visible spiritual beings, we'd actually shrink away from personal responsibility. We just become dependent, instead of growing independently into mature souls. So that's separation. It's entirely by design.
Section 1. The transition and losing our earthly desires. Moving past this earthly training ground, what exactly happens to the soul the second after physical death?
Right away, there is a stark contrast between our physical and spiritual realities. The text highlights what it calls the three major desires that pretty much rule our physical lives: appetite, sleep, and sex. Obviously, you can't just decide never to sleep or eat again without major biological consequences. But according to the source, once the soul leaves the body, the spiritual body is completely freed from all of that. The soul survives without needing 3 square meals a day or 8 hours of sleep. It's an instant liberation from earthly biology.
Section 2. The bewildered souls and the trap of materialism. As the source outlines, this transition is definitely not smooth for everyone. In fact, it can be deeply traumatic for those who fall into the trap of pure materialism.
Imagine the profound confusion here. Souls who lived purely materialistic lives and staunchly denied any kind of afterlife are thrown into absolute chaos. Because they don't have biological needs anymore, but they still feel completely conscious, they try to rationalize what's happening using earthly logic. They start wondering, wait, am I dreaming right now? Is this a hallucination? Or am I on some kind of hidden camera show?
The text points out that individuals who firmly, stubbornly rejected the afterlife, maybe calling all religions fake or dismissing spiritual concepts entirely, they simply lack the framework to process their new reality. They literally cannot comprehend that they are dead because they refuse to believe this state of existence was even possible in the first place.
And honestly, this brings us to an incredibly tragic reality. The deceased person might actually attend their own funeral. They see their family grieving, and they try to speak to them, yelling, "Hey, I'm right here." But your voice just does not reach the people of this world. The text emphasizes how utterly baffling and sad it is for these souls, shouting at their loved ones, completely unable to comprehend the sudden, invisible barrier that now separates the two worlds.
Section 3. The Life Drama Review, a cinematic reflection. Once the soul finally realizes and accepts that it is passed on, it moves to a highly structured, objective review of its earthly existence.
Here is the timeline of how this unfolds. Your life isn't just viewed as a random series of events, it's an accumulation. From your arrival on Earth at birth through all your specific life choices, right up to the separation from your physical body at death. And then comes the final step. The screening. This is a sequential, mandatory review process where your entire chronological life journey is played back. This review is quite literally compared to a movie screen. Your life is projected before you in what feels like a highly condensed, intense film. It's often described as feeling like roughly 2 hours in earthly time, though obviously in spiritual time it passes in a flash. You sit there and watch the life drama of your own existence, from beginning to end. Now pay really close attention to this specific detail. You do not get to watch this movie from your own personal, defensive perspective. The text emphasizes that this is a director's cut. It is an objective, edited digest viewed strictly through the eyes of your guardian spirit. This means no rose-colored glasses, you can't make excuses, you have to see your actions and the ripples of those actions with absolute, unbiased clarity.
Section 4. The Final Destination. Dividing Heaven and Hell. Following this intense screening, a judgment is made, and it's determined by a very specific, emotion-based sorting mechanism.
The source maps out its core thesis perfectly right here. Your ultimate destination is dictated by your habitual emotional state. If your earthly life was defined by positive emotions, joy, happiness, pleasure, gratitude, you naturally align with heaven. On the flip side, if your life was anchored in negative emotions, anger, deep sorrow, resentment, grudges, those heavy emotional anchors naturally pull your soul downward toward hell. It's an automatic sorting process, based entirely on the emotional frequency you cultivated while you were alive.
As the source text emphatically states, if your mind produces a constant stream of negative thoughts, grudges, and anger, you are literally constructing a hellish spiritual trajectory. The text explains that living an earthly life clouded by those dark emotions creates a reality that the soul simply cannot escape upon death. You naturally gravitate to the realm that perfectly matches your inner state.
And this emotional rule is so foundational that it isn't just for humans. The text notes that this applies to animals too. A beloved pet that dies loved, happy, and safe will gravitate toward a heaven-like Rome. But an animal that dies violently, filled with fear or anger, will experience a basic hellish state. It is presented as a universal law of emotional gravity.
So let's step back and look at the entire chronological framework we've covered today. These are the core takeaways from the text. Earth is an intentionally shielded training ground to force us to grow. Death frees us from the biology of eating and sleeping. If we are purely materialistic, we just trap ourselves in profound post-death confusion. Ultimately, every single one of us must sit through the objective, cinematic review of our life drama. And finally, the universe sorts us based on the habitual earthly emotions we chose to live with every single day.
It's a highly structured, unyielding view of the universe, where our inner emotional lives carry incredible eternal weight. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought, based strictly on the criteria we explored today. If the life you live today, with all its passing thoughts and dominant emotions, was suddenly played back on that objective review screen, where exactly would your emotions lead you?
Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we are diving into some seriously fascinating source material that poses a wild, provocative idea. What if our afterlife isn't dictated by some giant external judgment day, but is actually being built directly by our everyday mindset right here, right now? We're going to unpack some profound spiritual philosophies that suggest the very thoughts you are thinking at this exact moment are actively shaping your future spiritual reality. It is an absolutely powerful concept, and I'm super excited to get into it with you today. Okay, let's look at our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover how your thoughts define you. Then, we'll look at the trap of hell. In part 3, it will explore the keys to actually escape that trap. And finally, we'll talk about cultivating a positive mind. All right, starting right off with Section 1, your thoughts define you. Before we jump into the text's wisdom, I really want you to think about this for a second. Who are you, really? If you strip away your job title, your physical body, your bank account, what is actually left at your absolute core? What is the true nature of a human being? Take a mental pause and just let that ancient question sink in. Because the source material we're analyzing today gives us a remarkably sharp answer. The original text comes right out and says it. A human's true identity is literally just their thoughts. That's it. Our physical bodies don't define us at all. It boils down entirely to our internal mental landscape. What you choose to focus on, the everyday attitudes you adopt, those quiet little beliefs you hold when absolutely no one else is watching, that is the real you. Which brings us to Section 2, the trap of hell. Now, if our thoughts are our true reality, we've got to be incredibly careful here. If our mental landscape gets polluted, it can morph into a literal trap. The author gives us a very stark warning, pointing out that people with, quote, stubborn personalities who hold deep grudges easily become ghosts or hell spirits after death. So the text suggests that hell isn't necessarily a fiery pit created by an angry deity. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a DIY psychological prison built entirely by our own inability to just let things go. And the source explicitly connects the stubborn mind to becoming a lingering earthbound spirit. Chronic complaining, repeating the exact same grievances for years, clinging to strong attachments, all of this creates a super heavy frequency. People who just cannot forget their resentments are literally tying themselves down because they refuse to adopt a clear, forgiving state of mind. So the crucial point here is recognizing the huge difference between these two paths. We have the liberated mind, which is fully capable of self-reflection. It looks inward to fix its own mistakes and naturally wants to grow spiritually. But then we have the hellish mind. The text defines the fundamental essence of hellish spirits as pure self-centeredness. Instead of looking in the mirror to see where they went wrong, they just project all their misery outward. And honestly, this leads to a pretty chilling realization detailed in the source. Rather than reflecting on their own flaws, these miserable spirits actively try to pull the living down into their despair. Why? Just to feel validated. Misery loves company, right? They want to increase their numbers so they don't have to face their pain alone. It shows exactly why honest self-reflection is an absolute non-negotiable necessity if we want to avoid falling into this toxic gravitational pull.
Okay, so let's shift gears to Section 3, Keys to Escape Hell.
If hell is essentially a psychological trap made out of stubbornness, how do we break the lock? Well, the source hands us the exact tools, starting with impermanence. To demystify this classic Buddhist concept for a second, it's simply the realization that absolutely everything in the world is constantly changing. Nothing lasts forever. Not your wealth, not your status, and definitely not that offense someone committed against you a decade ago. Realizing that is the ultimate cure for holding a grudge. I mean, why hold on to something with a death grip when it's destined to fade away anyway? The second tool here is non-self. This is the realization that there is no permanent independent ego. The text explains that practicing non-self lets us detach from all those worldly obsessions. Once we realize our ego is kind of just an illusion, we free ourselves from the very thing that could so easily offended and stubborn in the first place. Think about it. You can't trap a mind that refuses to make everything about me, me, me. And the result of actually using these tools? You arrive at a state of nirvana. The author describes this as a realm of absolute quiet and a perfectly pure state of mind. It's serene. It's unpolluted consciousness. By simply letting go of that stubbornness, embracing impermanence, and dissolving the ego, your mindset naturally elevates right into this beautifully clear, peaceful frequency. And that brings us to our final part, Section 4, Cultivating a Positive Mind. Because listen, just letting go of the negative is really only half the battle. We have to actively replace those empty spaces with proactive, positive thoughts. And the author recommends this fascinating method: overcoming that secret, sometimes toxic desire to see other people fail. The text notes that almost everyone has a tiny bit of that dark feeling deep down. But if you can consciously choose to bless the success of others instead, your own life becomes vastly easier. It's basically the ultimate shortcut to your own happiness. The author shares a great personal anecdote here about their own youth, talking about how they used to feel inferior when comparing themselves to others. But the massive breakthrough they had was realizing that switching from painful envy to a genuine, heartfelt congratulations completely changes the game. When you celebrate successful people sincerely, you elevate your mindset totally out of those hellish frequencies. You align yourself with the energy of success instead of the energy of lack.
So, let's break this down into 3 super actionable takeaways from our explainer today. Step 1. Sincerely bless the success of others. Just kill that ego-driven jealousy on the spot. Step 2. Stop comparing and find your own unique path in life. What is your individual reason for being? And step 3. Continuously improve yourself on that exact path. These 3 steps are the ultimate blueprint for maintaining a liberated, heaven-bound mindset every single day.
To wrap all of this up into one major thesis, your mindset determines your spiritual reality, period. The true nature of a human being is their thoughts. If you choose stubbornness, holding grudges, and self-centeredness, you're literally building your own hell. But if you practice letting go, recognize that things change, and actively cultivate real joy for others, you create a heavenly state of mind right here on Earth and beyond. You hold the keys to the whole shebang. So I want to leave you with this one provocative question to chew on today. Whose success can you sincerely bless right now to break free from self-centeredness? Think of one person, maybe shoot them a text, or just hold that really positive thought in your mind for a minute. Apply this lesson today and just watch how it shifts your reality. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this sparked some curiosity for you, and I'll catch you next time as we continue to break down more fascinating ideas. Keep learning and keep growing.
Welcome back to another explainer. Today we're jumping straight into Chapter 3 of our source text. And let me tell you, we are unpacking some seriously fascinating and honestly pretty provocative cosmology today. We're going to explore what the text says about the true nature of God, the actual existence of devils, and what it calls the spiritual royal road.
So think about this profound paradox that the text tackles right out of the gate. If there's just one absolute loving God, why on earth is human history so packed with religious conflict? Well, the answer presented here totally redefines how we understand the divine. It throws out that standard assumption of just one solitary figure sitting at the very top of the cosmos.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the truth about God, then the nature of devils, how worldly desires are exploited, the royal road, and finally, letting go of attachments.
All right, Section 1, the truth about God and rethinking the divine. Here is the absolute core of the argument. You know how traditional monotheism assumes there's a single absolute God at the very peak of the mountain? Well, our source argues that the entities worshipped as God across various world religions are actually a multitude of high-level spirits. We're talking angels, bodhisattvas, beings like that. And here's the kicker. The text asserts that mistaking these individual localized guides for the one absolute God, that is exactly what sparks all these religious conflicts on Earth.
The text states this super plainly. It claims there are many types of spirits acting as high-level entities close to God, and these spirits possess distinct differences in both their individuality and their rank. So just because a specific religion receives guidance from one of these high-level spirits, it definitely doesn't mean that spirit is the only divine being out there.
To visualize this, the book maps out this esoteric structure, kind of like a giant puzzle or a massive pyramid. These divine beings operate on totally different levels based on their rank. Major world religions might be guided by entities at the very highest ranks, right? But then smaller, local religions might get their guidance from spirits residing in the sixth dimension, or maybe even local figures like hermits. Obviously, the higher up the pyramid you go, the fewer spirits there are. But the main takeaway here is that the spiritual realm is this vast, heavily populated hierarchy. It is not a solo operation.
Moving on to Section 2, the nature of devils and the adversarial forces.
Now, to drive home a really serious spiritual point, the author actually uses a surprisingly modern analogy. They literally reference He Who Must Not Be Named from Harry Potter. It's a great comparison because, according to this worldview, devils are very active realities, and actually naming specific dark entities creates a spiritual connection to them. You're essentially inviting them right in.
But despite that warning about casually naming them, the text does categorize these forces to educate us. It explicitly points out that high-level devils like Lucifer and Beelzebub absolutely do exist. Beelzebub, for instance, is identified here as the number 2 devil within the Christian lineage. And these entities aren't just sitting around idle, they're actively working as antagonists in the spiritual hierarchy, purposefully trying to derail human spiritual progress.
Which brings us to Section 3, exploiting worldly desires and the mechanics of temptation.
So how exactly do these demonic entities operate? Well, they don't just appear out of thin air. They need a way in. The text explains that devils cunningly target the human ego. They exploit our everyday desires for status, honor, and wealth. The author uses this fascinating metaphor, saying devils use these worldly desires like a fishing hook. Even incredibly mundane things like a family dispute over property can act as a wide-open invitation for them to step in.
All right, Section 4, the royal road and the path to spiritual defense.
So how do you protect yourself against these unseen temptations and actually achieve true salvation? The text defines a very active, practical path called the royal road of religion. And this road is basically paved with 2 core actions: pure faith and missionary work.
This framework relies on 3 fundamental pillars. First, because of that massive pyramid of spirits we talked about earlier, the text argues you have to establish a clear object of worship so you avoid spiritual confusion. Second, you've got to maintain pure faith to push out all those impurities of the ego. And third, you need to engage in active missionary work. Spreading the faith is presented as a vital anchor to secure yourself against that demonic corruption.
Finally, Section 5, letting go of attachments and the practice of dana.
Here, the author introduces the practice of dana, which basically translates to making offerings. But we're not just talking about dropping some spare change in a donation bin. It's defined as a really vital spiritual discipline. Its primary purpose is to help you consciously let go of the exact earthly attachments that those devils use as their fishing hooks. The text argues that offering even a small amount physically measures the true strength of your faith in the unseen world, rather than just the visible material world.
By actively practicing this letting go, literally giving up a piece of your earthly wealth or status, the text suggests you are actively starving those demonic forces of the leverage they desperately need. It's framed as a physical practice, purposefully designed to fortify your spiritual defense.
As we wrap up today's explainer, we've journeyed through a highly structured spiritual cosmos, right? From a pyramid of divine spirits to opportunistic adversarial forces, all the way down to the very practical defenses of pure faith and letting go. So it leaves us with this really provocative thought drawn directly from the text. In your own everyday life, are your desires for status, wealth, or ego quietly leaving a door wide open for an unseen reality? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the source material, and as always, keep questioning what lies beneath the surface.